details of the new forms and the database that we're going to be using. Feel free to zero in on that as we talk about these different forms. It'll be clearer to you and to your audience. Now, the first thing we're going to talk about is the application for ballot by mail. There are the old forms, and then there is a brand new form that has been created under Senate Bill 1. All the old forms, which some people have stockpiled, including the League of Women Voters and a lot of campaigns and a lot of political operatives, have to be thrown away. They are no good, and a lot of people are still trying to use the old form because we've had a paper shortage, and the printing of these new forms means they're scarce. They're hard to come by. Nevertheless, you have to use the new form. If somebody sends in one of the old forms, their ballot will be rejected. The new form, as you can see, with the yellow highlighted square around the box, that's the place where people are to write either their driver's license number, their state ID number, or the last 4 digits of their Social Security number. These additional IDs are now required for anybody who wants to vote by mail. This is the additional ID that the legislature put in to supposedly increase the security for by mail. Excuse me. Now, what the next step for what we do with those identification numbers is the voter is playing a guessing game with this. The voter is trying to remember the number that they signed up with at the voter registration office, however, 10, 20, 30 years ago. What number did I use for the voter registration database? Was it my driver's license number? Did I use my Social Security number? Do you remember what you signed up with? I didn't. I had to go back and look it up. Voters are going to be playing the same guessing game. They don't remember. So how do we advise them? So far, we have not received instructions from the Secretary of State's office to tell voters how to go look up this information. And therein is the beginning of the problem for voters. Because if they send in, say, their driver's license number, but they gave their Social Security number when they first signed up, the numbers don't match, and they lose that ballot. It gets rejected. It gets sent back to them. Now, if any of these numbers don't match, we must reject it, and we send a notice to the voter, and you can see it on the far right side there, the notice of rejection to voter. This is all done in cooperation with voter registration. So you have 2 large offices trying to coordinate together with a statewide office with a database that is right now blank. The statewide database that Travis County can access does not have information for its voters entered into it. Now, the other thing I want to point out to you, too, is that this is a two-way street. There are 2 opportunities for the voter to make a mistake with this, because when you return your ballot, let's say you get through the application process and you get a ballot returned to you. When you send your ballot back in with an envelope that's also brand new and must be used, and again, these are in short supply, there's a paper shortage as well as the time to get these new forms printed. When you mail your ballot back in this new envelope, you have to include your identification information again. So last 4 digits of your Social Security number or your driver's license number, again, matching the number that you originally put on your application. And then if you notice the way it's designed, when they seal their ballot into the envelope, the flap covers their identity information. So for people who feel squeamish about using their Social Security number, at least this part is protected. So the identity information, the identity number, applies to returning your ballot as well. So it's a round trip where you can get tripped up. So let's talk about the cure process. All right, let's say we have a voter who has gotten a rejection notice and they try to get back in touch with either their local clerk's office or the Secretary of State's office. Just a couple of days ago, the Secretary of State took issue with me because I complained that we couldn't get any help with answers to what do we tell voters, and the information to, the information telling voters, oh, just look it up in our vote by mail new tracker database wasn't helpful, because it really does look like this when you, and you can see it up there too, when voters try to pull it up. Again, it is blank for Travis County. And we're going to talk about a theory about why we think that's the case. So the Secretary of State's office says to me, well, Dana, you don't have to throw a press conference. All you have to do is just call me. We have documented how very difficult it is to try to get in touch with the Secretary of State's office. It isn't just me. There are a lot of counties that are having difficulty getting in touch. Here's one quote from one of my colleagues. I have called, this is Friday, I have called several times a day for a week and no one has answered. I have sent emails with no replies. Has anyone received any answers to the following questions? And she lists 4 questions. One of them is, do we have any instruction on the state's online ballot tracker portal? I have no idea how this process will work. Another says, we are also the same kind of county. Our online ballot tracker is blank, and I have no information on ballot tracker. I can't get any replies from the Secretary of State either. And again, we were told on December 31st that the Secretary of State would be hosting a webinar on the new tracker, and that is the last I heard. Pretty terrible that the public is getting information on this website on Facebook, but we have not received any training on it at all. Just from our own experience, what I would let you know is we have it documented that on one day we tried, it took us 33 tries to get through to the Secretary of State's office. So when the Secretary says, just please call me, I think he does not realize that his office is not programmed to receive. Here are a couple of other problems that we're running into that are not good for voters. And if I seem a little upset by this, it is because voters are being mistreated in this circumstance. When they run into situations and they can't, check the portal online, when they can't reach the Secretary of State's office, they call the County Clerk's office. And we end up in a situation of this back and forth with the voter. And because Senate Bill 1 prohibits the county clerk from sending out applications for ballot by mail, from promoting ballot by mail, by doing anything to assist the voter with ballot by mail, I can't give them a lot of information. For example, one of the common sense ways I could tell a voter to cure the problem of mismatched numbers, there is a very common sense, easy way to handle this. But if the county clerk, if any of the election officials in Texas try to tell another voter, oh, well, the only thing you really have to do is just simply write 2 numbers, both your driver's license number and your Social Security number, on your application, and that way it will go through. I run the risk of a state jail felony. It is illegal for me to tell anyone that kind of information. Now, other people can tell voters that kind of information. You can say that to your friends and neighbors. The parties can say that to their voters. Almost anyone can say, take this common sense approach. This is a good solution. But this office cannot say that. We are hampered, and it is a serious offense. I would not encourage any of my colleagues around the state to risk that. I know what it's like to come under the fire of a large state agency. There's another problem that we've run into for those of us who are trying to help voters vote, is that when a voter receives a rejection notice, I am not allowed to forward that name on to anyone else who might be able to help them, like a campaign, the League of Women Voters, a political party. I must hold all of those rejections confidential. I can't share them with anybody until after Election Day. Another provision of SB 1. So what can our voters do? Because what I would like for people to do is not be threatened or overwhelmed by this at all. The best thing to do when faced with voter suppression, and my friends, this is what voter suppression looks like. The best way to defeat it is to go vote. The best thing to do is to fight back. So what do we tell people to do? Well, they can call the party office. Since this is a primary, you're going to be voting in either the Republican Party or the Democratic Party primary. Choose one of those offices and get help from them. And I realize that across the state, that's going to put a burden on those local offices. It's also going to put a burden on the state office. I think they would welcome the opportunity to help you. So voters, please take advantage of that offer. All of the local offices are going to be hamstrung. So if you feel like you're not getting support from your local county clerk or your local elections administrators, there is a very good reason. It is illegal for us to give you too much information about by-mail voting. And finally, what do we do if the Secretary of State's office vote-by-mail tracker system still isn't working and the voter can't get their question answered from looking at that tracker because it's still blank, or the information that you need to know about which number you provided is still blank? What do? You can't call the Secretary of State's office because you can't get through on their busy lines. Well, what do? You keep trying. You tell voters, don't give up. Keep trying. Keep calling us. Keep calling the parties. Keep calling your friends. Keep watching even social media, although be very, very careful about what you read on social media, because I don't want you to get tricked. You need legitimate sources of information. But you're going to have to fight through this. This kind of suppression was designed to stop you from voting. Do not let it stop you from voting. Now, here's the other thing. In defense of all of the offices around the state who are struggling with this, what I would say is that SB1 has set a very high bar for any of our offices to be able to cope with this SB1, with these new SB1 requirements. Every office involved, voter registration and elections, and every ballot by mail voter must perform each step in this process timely and accurately. In other words, perfectly, or you are very likely to lose your right to vote. Today, 30 minutes, well, let me go back. Saturday at 11 a.m., we received notice from the Secretary of State's office that they had suddenly scheduled a 9 a.m. press conference, 9 a.m. webinar for this morning, 30 minutes ahead of this press conference, and that they were going to talk to election officials about how to do rejections. That is not all that helpful. I mean, thank you very much. But what we really need to know is, how do you use the portal, and when are you going to turn it on? We found out just a little while ago that the Secretary of State's office will be conducting a webinar on Thursday that will teach us how to use the portal. Now, that is too little, too late, but it's better than nothing. So I'm glad my criticisms of this process have caused the Secretary of State's office to scurry around and get back with us, because they are late and overdue. Now, I have a couple more things to say about the Secretary of State's office. One of them is, that most of the people who work in the Secretary of State's office are capable and dedicated public servants who are caught in a terrible situation. They do not want to be in a position where they can't help voters. Nevertheless, people like the Secretary and the legislature have placed them in this untenable situation, and we are all going to have to deal with the fact that that office has been poorly funded and ignored for far too long. And that was done deliberately. They don't want this office to help voters, and they want to do everything they can, the legislature with SB1, to stop counties from being able to help voters as well. In conclusion, what I would say to voters is, go vote. In person, if ballot by mail is a concern to you. We do have social distancing, or we will have social distancing at the polls and PPE. We're going to do our very best to protect you. So keep in mind that even if you are concerned about COVID, we think the polling places are safe. If you want to vote by mail, do your best to watch all of your instructions very carefully. This is the one time when you want to pay attention to the directions. Follow it very carefully, do everything it says, get help from friends, get help from your party of choice, and then do please exercise your right to vote. The last thing we want is for you to miss this opportunity to vote. Please go vote. And then finally, the last thing I have to say is there are some important dates that are listed up there. The last day to register to vote is coming up at the end of the month. And the last day to apply for a ballot by mail is Friday, February 18th. So voters still have plenty of time to apply for a ballot, plenty of time for everyone to get the word out to them that they need to include new identification numbers on their application for a ballot, and that those same numbers also have to be written on their ballot when they return their voted ballot back in to be counted. Okay, that's all I have for prepared remarks. I'm now available for questions, and I know this is complicated.
Do you think you could have done a better job communicating with voters about this new ID requirement? And what is communications like right now to voters who did get rejected?
I would love to have done more communication about this, but I am hamstrung. A state jail felony is nothing to, thumb your nose at. I would have preferred to tell voters exactly what to do. But I think under the circumstances, we're going to have to rely on the community and the parties to help solve the problem that the legislature created.
Do you know how many of the mail-in ballot requests, the applications, were rejected because they were the old form or because there were issues with the ID number?
We're working on that. We have a preliminary idea. I think you heard that Bayer County had a 50% rejection rate. We had a 50% rejection rate. Williamson County's rejection rate was 40%. Harris County was telling it a little differently. They said their rejection rate was 7 times their normal. Our rejection rate starting at 50%. We went back and started doing some research to see if we could figure out if we could correct some of them, and if we had the ballot tracker available to us, could we then help people, by saying, okay, yes, we can accept this. It's not just a matter of the information is blank. And as a matter of taking action on those rejections, we are trying to wait until after we get information from the Secretary of State's office, which we now hope will be Thursday, before we actually take action on those rejections. We have what looks like might be down to a 27% rejection rate. That is still extremely high. It is not unusual for primaries to have a higher than in comparison with other elections, a higher rate of rejection, but that's really high. And it does look like the no identification or the cross identification problem is about 16% of the problem. So the damage done to by mail voting, we think, is about 16% additional error rate that could have been avoided but for the fact of this unnecessary ID requirement. Your next door neighbor who just turned 65 and who's voting for the first time because they're afraid of COVID is not a fraudulent voter. Is it?
Specific numbers for how many applications were rejected out of how many, and how that would compare to past years?
That's a rolling number. It changes, every minute. But the stats that I have so far, we've had approximately 1,914 ballot by mail requests come in. We have rejected 509. That's about 27% rejection rate. But we're unclear if that's a true rejection rate. We think that it might be down from 50% down to 27%, which is still too high. And of that, it looks like 16% is just because people didn't know about this ID problem. That's the best I can do for you right now. We'll try to.
For a primary.
I'm sorry. It varies from presidential to gubernatorial, and whether it's hot or not. It can be low, it can be high. This is high, and I will have a better answer for you later once I've had the chance to get some correct answers.
Are your hands tied with reaching out to the campaigns? Because you said a lot of them might still have the old ballots or old applications, and if they're sending those out, I know they want those people to go vote.
Yes, they
so.
do. Yeah. We've already been in touch with all of the campaigns to tell them, throw away the old applications, don't use them because it will not serve your voters well. And so that part's already been done. I can do that and have done that. What I can't do is tell voters how to prevent the problem in the first place with the additional ID requirement.
And the Secretary of State's office said that they were backfilling driver's license data for people who might have registered with a Social Security number. Have you all gotten access to that data?
I understand that the DPS has entered driver's license numbers into the Secretary of State's database, but they are not visible to us. They're not visible to a lot of the counties, and we're looking forward to the time when we can use that information. Blue Jacket.
Is it 50% rejection rate or 27%? Can you explain this?
Yes, our initial rejection rate, based on the information we could not get from the ballot tracker, was a 50% rejection rate. That's when I sounded the alert that we have a problem. So did Bayer County, so did Williamson County, so did Harris County. A bunch of counties said we have the same kind of unreasonable rejection rate. And we started saying to the Secretary of State's office when we could get to them, this is a problem, tell us what's going on. We can't live like this. We can't have this high rejection rate. And they started telling us things like, oh, just call us, we'll help you figure it out. Or, oh, just look on Tracker, it's right there. When in fact we couldn't get through to them and the tracker information is blank. So until they make it available to us, what the Secretary of State should have said when they ran into this problem to all the counties, they should have said, dear counties, I'm so sorry. We're running late with this information. It's not your fault. There are some counties that can't see this data right now, and we're working as quickly as we can to get you up and running and trained on how to log on, do the data entry, audit it, and proof it so that you can use this tool for conducting elections. That's what they should have said. Yes, ma'am.
Dana, do you know how many ballot applications were rejected because they were illegal?
We've got it broken. These are raw numbers and they're guesses because I just don't have something to back it up against. But it looks like of those 500, about half were because they didn't do anything with the ID at all. And then we've got another much smaller percentage, a few more, maybe another 50 or so, they didn't match the ID. They didn't guess right. That'll give you a rough idea of where we are. So if we can get the word out to people to use the ID and maybe use the common sense solution of using both of them, we'll cure a lot of this problem. I just have to find other people to tell voters that for me. I had another, yes.
Dana, with your experience, have you seen an issue in the past with this magnitude that would prevent some people from exercising their vote?
No, this is all brand new. This is all because of SB1. These are new obstacles for voters. They have never had to deal with this kind of problem in the past. This is brand new.
Is the threat of the state jail felony also kind of hampering, your ability to communicate with voters about the secure process, and what can you all do?
Yes, it is. It is hampering our ability to deal with the cure process. If the Secretary of State will open up and populate their VBM tracker, their vote by mail tracker system, that will go a long way to us helping voters figure out what's wrong. And I can give them the information that comes from the database. So I can share that. But if I don't have that information available to us, then there's nothing we can do on the phone. Here's one more thing that SB1 has done to us too about how hamstrung we are with helping voters. When a voter calls and asks for an application for a ballot by mail to be mailed to them, calls our office, and we're filling out the information so that we can fulfill their request. Always in the past, they always said, oh, and could you also send one for my spouse too? And we say, sure, no problem. What's the name? And we would just enclose both of them and send them off. Now we have to say, no, I'm sorry, your spouse has to individually call us and request separately a ballot by mail application. I can't take both of them from just one person.
What are you hearing from voters when you have to tell them that? I mean, would you say people are adequately aware of all of these changes, or is there a lot of confusion?
Yeah, of course they are not aware. And this confusion has been deliberately, caused in order to, this is disruptive. Usually they say something to us like, this is ridiculous. And I would agree with them.
Are you hearing of any problems with elderly populations? Or since there were a lot of changes for requirements if you're assisting a voter who's 65 and older, have there been issues with that?
Yes. And the part for disability and the variety of needs a person might have to have an assistance is even more complicated, because the law now says we can't go through the assistant to talk to the voter about requesting a ballot by mail. We have to talk directly to the voter, even if the voter lacks the ability to communicate with us. We can't use the assistant like we always have in the past, where people with disabilities, their assistant calls us up and says what they need, what the address is, where it needs to go. We can't talk through the assistant now to get the voter services. We have to talk directly to the voter, even when that is impossible to do. So that applies also to anybody who's over 65. They have to talk directly to us. They can't talk to us through an assistant. So for people with disabilities, this is a big hurdle to get over. I anticipate a lawsuit. This cannot stand. We have to be able to use assistance in a much more reasonable way.
And has your office been able to communicate this stuff with like nursing homes or any other places where some of these people might be, studying this information?
Right. We've only just begun that process. I anticipate there's going to be a flurry of telephone calls from folks asking us about this. We'll do our very best to explain to them, and we're working right now on write-ups that we can put on the website, so that if we get overloaded with phone calls, at least you can look on the website and find out what's going on.
Dana, on a personal level, retiring during this mess, how does it feel?
The fight to gain the right to vote has always been a fight. So 2 years ago it was a fight. This year it's a fight. Next year it will be a fight. So nothing has changed. Perhaps I'm more comfortable stepping up and, being a rallying person for the cry to fight back. But I'm just as sure that the people who come after me are going to be very capable of carrying on this fight. And the other thing is that I'm not going very far. I'm not really leaving the field of elections, so I'm not leaving the battlefield either.
Are you going to be able to stay vocal?
As a matter of fact, I might be able to be more vocal once I leave office. So I intend to stay involved in elections. Yes.
Can you explain?
I'm sorry, Marta.
Yeah, the question that has come up from the community, people that use naturalization certificates,
Yes.
passports, military ID, and also IDs for gun permits. Does that affect those as well?
Yes, and this is where it does get really complicated, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds with y'all, but yes, and there's one other category of people that are problematic. All the people who have asked for privacy for their addresses, victims, police officers, judges, those sorts of folks, they're going to have difficulty using the portal because their addresses are concealed, they're cloaked. So there are lots of examples of people who are going to have difficulty. And this morning, NPR did a story on the fact that the League of Women Voters, who always prepares packets for people who are newly naturalized citizens, and in their packet they get a voter registration card. One of the new ones, the Secretary of State's office has told them as of this morning that they can't provide them with materials for those packets because they don't have enough, because they failed to plan ahead and get this done in time to answer these questions for the primary. So, yeah, everybody is being affected by these obstacles to voting that are being caused by SB 1.
I just got a question from a voter on Twitter. A few years ago, DPS added a leading 0 to the Texas driver's license. Do they use the 7-digit or the 8-digit number?
You know what? Does anybody know the answer to that? I know my driver's license starts with a 0.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
what
so-
do they use the 7-digit one?
Wait a minute. Let me just count it up. It's the 8-digit one they're using.
Okay. Even if when they register to vote, they have the 7-digit one?
Oh, you know what? That's a good question. The database, maybe vote by mail. It's one of the things they need to tell us. What happens if a voter is using an old number instead of a new one? You can have, if you're over, I believe it's 70, you can have an expired driver's license up to 4 years out of date and still vote. So I think anybody with a driver's license that's no more than 4 years old would have the 8-digit version. So maybe this isn't going to affect us, but you bring up a good point. What if we have conflicting digits? What happens there? That's the Secretary of State's job, is to determine all that and then work that out with the voter registrar and the county clerk or the elections administrator. Blue jacket.
Can you explain how you are restricted in informing voters things about their status with that plan to state locality?
Okay, it's the way the law is interpreted. The law says that I cannot, on my own, unilaterally send out a voter registration application to voters. That voters have to individually request one from this office, one at a time. And that if I do anything else to promote vote by mail, I am in danger of a state jail felony. So the broad interpretation of that is if I help them fill out a ballot by mail application, then I am promoting ballot by mail, and that is where we get into trouble with the law. It's too broad, too vague, and not helpful for voters, and I would very much like to assist voters a lot more than what the current interpretation of the law allows. Yes?
I was just curious, in the past, were you able to give more information than what you're able to do today?
Absolutely, absolutely. We could talk to voters as much as they needed until they got it correct. And that was one of the things that saved so many voters from common mistakes, is that we could get them on the phone when their application came in. Maybe they forgot to say which party, or maybe they forgot to say they wanted to include a runoff, or maybe they forgot some other piece of information. All we had to do was call them on the phone or send them a quick email, and we could cure that application sometimes within just hours. All of that is now no longer available to election offices. And that's not good for voters, and it's not good for us, for those of us who would like to help voters. And this is statewide. Okay. Anything else? I'm actually thrilled that my complaints have stirred up the Secretary of State's office. We need their help, and I'm looking forward to getting their advice.
I just do have something in the past.
Marta, why don't you come join me? I think everybody here knows Marta Cotera.
Thank you. Well, I asked this question as a advocate for voting. In the past, the voter registrar would hold public seminars, so members of the public could attend and get updated. Can you do that, or is that considered too close to your function as a county clerk?
Yeah. Because Travis County has split its elections into a voter registration office and an elections office, it's in two places, I have legal questions about what the voter registrar can do. And the county attorney is considering that right now. So the real answer is I'm not sure if Bruce's office would have more leeway than I would. Maybe not, but that's still to be determined. Okay, all right. Thank you so much for coming out today. Appreciate your time. Help me get the word out to voters.